Welcome to Monday Next. Two siblings, two different businesses, only honest conversations.
I'm Scott Monday, founder of Kitchen and Bath Crate, where we've turned construction chaos into systematic excellence with guaranteed timelines and results that break pretty much every industry rule.
And I'm Meredith Monday Schwartz, CEO of Here Comes the Guide, a wedding venue platform built on relationships instead of commissions, run by an all-women team that proves heart-forward business practices actually equal profit.
We're siblings who spent 15 years challenging each other's business philosophies, and we finally decided to hit record. Every week, we prove there's no right way to build a great business, just audacious choices that actually work.
No guests, no fluff, just the conversations that we would be having anyway. But now you get to listen in. Whether you're team heart forward or team systems first, or maybe you're still figuring out what kind of leader you want to be, we're here to show you that business doesn't have to be boring, generic, or divorced from real life.
This is Monday Next.
Scott, I am so glad that we are sitting down to talk today, but the topic that we are going to cover in our deep dive is one of my least favorite topics, but it's really important.
It is super important. It is heavy for sure.
Yeah.
But Meredith, I think it's the topic that separates the just okay businesses from the phenomenal businesses. I think it is the thing.
Well, it certainly is a topic that separates businesses with good culture and those that don't. And that is when to fire your top performer. Top performers sometimes have to go for the betterment of the business. So we've each had this experience. We are going to deep dive that later today. But first, Scott, let's talk about something which you didn't know I was going to introduce, but I would like to introduce a new segment here at the top of the show, because this is something that often when you and I are talking, just in our normal conversations that we have with each other, we will come into the conversation with some app, some tool that we've been using in our business that we think the other person might need. And I have one of those today. I'm workshopping segment titles, and I don't like the title Tool Time, but then that's just rolling off my tongue. So it's a little home improvement.
Yeah, Tool Time is a little bit of a 90s callback that
It is.
I don't know if we want to go there, huh?
Yeah. Well, okay. I do have a tool that we have been beta testing at Here Comes the Guide. We haven't rolled it out completely, so this is early days, but I've used it for a couple weeks now to the point where I definitely want to mention it to you. And part of the reason why I wanted to mention it to you is because we're doing this meeting on Google Meet. And as soon as I logged into Google Meet, this piece of software came into play because it told me what kind of person you are. And if I click on it, it tells me how I might want to deal with you. This is a piece of software called Crystal Knows. Crystal like the woman's name, and knows like I know something. And it is AI software that helps any business, but especially if you do sales of any kind, it helps you to know the personality of the person that you are going to be either pitching to or working within a company or outside with your customers. It's very easy to interface with. It uses a combination of information, which I haven't looked really closely at how it's gathering that. I am pretty sure that's a how the sausage gets made element that I really don't want to know. But it is uncanny how right it has gotten the personality type of the people in my life that I've added to my profile. So it basically gives you all kinds of tools and helps you understand that person. It helps you understand how you will interact with that person, where you and that person are different and where you are similar. It really helps with group dynamics. So you can choose, like, for example, I put my entire team into my people within Crystal Knows. And now if I go into a brainstorming meeting with 5 particular people, I can get a good sense of what the benefits are going to be of that group and what potential pitfalls might be within the dynamics of that group. So it's using AI, it's using personality structures. It's a very, very useful tool that for Kitchen and Bath Crate, Scott, I could see you guys really benefiting from, because if you have some information about a potential client, you would be able to adjust your pitch based on how they will best receive information.
It's so interesting to me because we're also considering rolling out some element of initial virtual conceptual design meetings with customers. And so to be able to have that information on a Google Meet or a Zoom or something like that sounds really helpful. No idea where they're grabbing this data from. Does it give you any sense like, they're probably scanning social media profiles, or what's your guess?
There's no question that LinkedIn is playing into it. I know that for sure. And then I think they're probably scanning social media. I think it's scanning websites. I think it's pulling together a lot of data as quickly as possible. And then it's matching some of those things with the DISC personality system and then kind of putting you on a rainbow. So I'm an ID in that system, and that is pretty close to my personality. You are the letter D, but it called you a captain. I'm supposed to be direct with you when I disagree. I should not beat around the bush. When I talk to you, it tells me I should stay focused on one point, and I should expect that conversation will move quickly. You are not interested in shooting the shit, basically. And all those things are pretty correct about you. Am I right?
Yes, 100%. Was there a way to know what it says about you?
Well, I can tell you that I tend to not like a lot of small talk. I tend to move pretty quickly, just in my normal pace of things. I know that some people have been told that I'm fairly comfortable with risk. That's something that it talks about, how risk averse or comfortable with risk someone is. Like, should that conversation be data driven, or are they more of a feelings person? And it kind of helps you adjust your pitch based on those things. I am not affiliated with them in any way, shape, or form. They have no idea I exist. So there's no profit motive here. I just think, Scott, for your business, you'd like it. But when it emails you before your meetings, if your meetings are scheduled in a calendar that you've shared with them, and it tells you what to expect in the group that's in that meeting, like it gives you some information about that meeting in particular. And then the more you use it, the better it gets, because of course it's doing that AI learning.
This is so interesting. Another thing this kind of plays into for me is this idea that we as business owners, we get rated, right, on all sorts of platforms and Google and Yelp and whatnot. But there's really no customer rating. And the reason being because trying to get all that data into the same spot, trying to get feedback from those that have provided services to customers, obviously a monumental task, I think, until the next couple years, because quite frankly, red flag personalities might in the next 5 years be made apparent to service providers and vendors, and people may steer away from that customer, which can you imagine the social implications of that? Like you become in essence a pariah to service providers. But quite frankly, there's some people that might need to be the case.
Yeah, it would be really easy, for example, for them to go out and find every review that you've left on the 5 biggest review sites, whatever those are, and to pull those together and give you a sense of, how many 1-star reviews do you get? What are the kinds of things that you complain about? Now, that's not what Crystal Knows is doing right now. I just want to be clear on that. But I think you're absolutely right. That is coming. And the ability to put all of this information together really quickly, because Crystal Knows pulls together when you enter a person in there and you give them the LinkedIn link, for example, it's immediately giving you this information. And I can tell you, we've used it at Here Comes the Guide already, and it's really given our salespeople much more confidence going into a meeting. That might be its most secret sauce, that feeling of confidence. So a tool you might want to check in on. All right, let's move to our Monday moment of the week. Scott, we talked about how we've paid our people. We've talked about our 4-day work week. We've been talking about a lot of different things. How are you finding that doing this work in Monday Next is melding into your real life, your day-to-day life?
Yeah, these topics are weighing heavily on me both before and after recording. And in the spirit of vulnerability and authenticity, which you and I decided we will ascribe to on this podcast, I'm going to admit that I'm beginning to feel like the attention I'm paying to the people side of my business is lacking a little bit. Do I think we have a great place to work? Yes. Do I think that I'm doing my utmost to make that the case? I don't think I am. I think I'm lucky to have some great people around me that are those carriers of culture and those connectors of people. But I'm just feeling like I'm operating at a C level in that realm of my business. And these last few episodes, and perhaps even today, are revealing some weakness there.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I've been thinking a similar thing for my own self, thinking, are listeners going to get this impression that I'm so people first and I'm so, like that's my only obsession, that I'm not really thinking about the actual business basics, the actual numbers and, dollars and cents about the business, which of course is not true. But to your point, my COO, Lisa Shields, is such a numbers person. She's very, very data driven in ways that I am not. And I am constantly reminded how lucky I am that I have someone working so closely with me who fills that gap in my personality, because that's just not who I am. So you and I have very complementary skills. And I think to your point, no CEO is ever going to be the entire package. It's impossible. What matters is exactly what you just said, that we put people around us who fill in those gaps. And you've done that.
Yeah, definitely. Will it be something I'll ever be at A+ at? No, I'm just accepting that. But do I believe that effort and work needs to be put into that realm in 2026? 100%.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Interesting that our two kind of Monday moments of the week were very similar to each other as we think about doing this work. I love having these conversations though. And I do love the ability to really hone down on the specifics of a particular topic, like the conversation that we're going to have today, which is, when do you fire your top performer? So I think every business has had this happen. You have someone on your team who is so good at their job. They crush every metric that you need them to crush. They bring in revenue, they close deals, they get results. And also at some point you realize, either slowly or all at once, that they are poisoning your culture.
I think I struggle with this topic from a perspective of, I'm a little bit more keyed in on focusing on numbers and results, right? And so when that person that is either toxic or heading that direction is still producing and the numbers look good and the data says there's not a problem, but there's that thing in the back of my head that says there's a problem, I might be a little slower to take action. In fact, an example I brought for today's episode was an example of not taking action soon enough and the fallout that ensued.
Yeah, there's absolutely no question, Scott. I think at the highest level of this discussion, I think we have to decide that, in fact, sometimes you do have to fire your top performer. I say that because I think that there are some times in our CEO journey where we wonder if that's ever the right decision. If you have someone who is bringing money in on the revenue line, is it ever the responsible choice? And I think what we're saying is both of us wholeheartedly believe, yes, there are times that it is the responsible choice. You have to let a person go and hurt your company in the short term for its long-term gain.
Right. I think it brings up an interesting question, and I'm in a group called EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. You and I have talked a lot about that over the years. It's been exceptionally influential in my business journey the last 8 years. And this Wednesday, we had our forum meeting, which is about a 4.5-hour long meeting with 9 other business owners, fully confidential, with a very structured format. The key theme of Wednesday's meeting was this idea of culture. And I don't like the word culture. I feel like it's a word like leadership. It's so broad and can be so vague. It's one of those words that someone that wants to dive into the weeds of things and understand them, it almost like scrambles my brain when I hear the word culture or leadership or these general terms that you'd see up on an inspirational poster in an office. If there's a word on an inspirational poster, I'm going to look at it and be like, I don't really know what that means, right? So culture is one of those. And so we spent a lot of this meeting discussing, like, first of all, what is culture in our business and what causes it to erode and what causes it to strengthen. And so, Meredith, when we talk about this idea of toxic employees that are performing in a strong way, but bringing the culture down, let's talk a little bit about what does that mean? Like, how do you as a leader know that they're affecting culture? What does that look like? And let's come up with a definition of culture. Otherwise, we can't define toxicity against it.
Okay. I agree that the word culture is overexposed at this point, no question, to the point of being meaningless. And here comes the guide. Culture is that feeling of all for one and one for all at our company. In fact, our very first value, our most important value is support each other always. And it's the idea that we talk about it, Here Comes the Guide, is the idea of, we use the word sistering, and we use it as a verb in its oldest definition. It has nothing to do with even femaleness. Sistering is actually a very, very old term used in architecture, and there would be sistering posts that hold up the rest of the structure. And so when we talk about sistering each other, we're talking about being that strong platform of support for one another. It's unwavering. It's always there. That is what we build our culture around. So when I hire, I always say that I hire for culture as much as I hire for the job that I want them to do. I'm looking to hire people who the kind of group that we have is of utmost importance to them. So I always tell them there are two ways to get immediately fired at Here Comes the Guide. And I say this in every interview that I'm in, which is I interview every person who's going to work at Here Comes the Guide. First of all, lie to me or to lie to anybody. A big part of our culture is trust. Trust is the key. I trust you to do your work properly, even though you work from home and there's nobody there monitoring you. I trust you to always represent the company in the way that you need to represent. I trust that you have my back. You trust that I have yours. Trust is at the heart of it. So lie to me is the first way to get fired from Here Comes the Guide. The second way to get fired from Here Comes the Guide, immediately, with no warning whatsoever, is talk shit about somebody else at the company. A lot of people ask us, how do you manage a team of 44 all women without there being drama? First of all, I hate that question because men are as drama as women any day of the week. Secondly, we hire for culture. We hire girls. We don't hire mean girls. And we make sure people know if you stir up shit against any of your team member and I find out about it, I will fire you immediately. You will be gone by the end of that day. It's a slippery slope. And my job is to make sure that we hold that so tightly that we never fall down. I had never had to actually do it until a couple of years ago, when all of a sudden I did, and it was my top performer. It was one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make at the company, because this was a person that I had worked with for a long time. This was a person that I liked a lot. This was a person that was very good at her job. And it came to me that there was a culture amongst the smaller team that she was on, that she was leading, that had begun to believe under her leadership that they were better and doing their work better than other teams, and that they decided to become their own little clique within the larger team. And I found out about it. I verified it. I called her in and I fired her immediately. And she admitted to everything. And I said, I'm going to have to let you go. And having to make that decision, it was also on my birthday. That sucked. But having to make that decision and then having to tell my team this very shocking piece of information was one of the hardest things that I'd ever done. But after that, it became clear that the issues that were going on were even deeper and kind of more spread than I even thought. So although I acted the same day that that information came to me, some of that stuff had already started to happen. Now, luckily, we were able to step in various ways and refit that group and that team and those employees. And that's ended up not only being good, but actually being so much stronger than ever before. So that's really my take home from this, is that yes, we did sustain some short-term revenue losses. No question. The benefit now, 2 years later, is tenfold on that team. It's so much stronger. It's operating exactly in line with the rest of the company, and the entire team is working really well together. So, Scott, what does toxic look like on your team?
I would define it as a misalignment with core values. And you mentioned your top core value of the sisterhood, if you will, and supporting one another, right? And Meredith, that's your top core value. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Right. So through the process of traction, EOS, we developed core values for Kitchen and Bath Crate back in 2017. And there's 5 of them. And the way we came up with them, they're not aspirational. I don't believe in aspirational core values. I believe in core values that reflect who you already are, perhaps at a slightly magnified level, right? That's as far as I'll go with the aspirational side of it. Mm-hmm. But in essence, what you want to do is you want to find the people on your team that are your type of people. You want to describe them, and then you want to find the commonalities amongst them. And that's how we came up with our core values. So the first person that came to mind on this topic of a excellent performer that eventually became toxic to the culture was an individual that was on the sales side, and he was producing. He produced for years. And at the end of 2022, something happened. And I really want to dive into that, Meredith, because my take on it is people don't change. I no longer believe in the ability to change your people. Now, do I think that people have changed before in the past? 1 out of 1,000? Yes, I know there's evidence that some people have changed. But when I say people don't change, I mean it's not my obligation as a business owner to wait for that to happen, right? The time, money, and effort that it takes to rehabilitate someone that either was never a strong performer or became a very weak performer or became toxic to your culture, I don't think that is the job of the business to solve. And I believe that it's best to simply part ways as early as you can in the recognition of that fall. And whether it be a new person that you're recognizing out of the gate or an existing team member that has performed well in the past that all of a sudden proves that they can no longer do the job or is unwilling to do the job. But at the end of the day, I define this toxicity as a misalignment with core values. And it can happen quickly, it can happen slowly, but either way, what we saw was like a spread of toxicity. Like, we've done jobs back when we used to do commercial construction that are being built on sites that have had something on it before that were toxic. And the first 2 that come to mind are dry cleaners and gas stations. Mm-hmm. And so what you have to do is you have to go in, and you have to get all these tests done, you have to bore down, you have to find the lowest form of the toxic issue, and you have to hog out that soil, and you have to off-haul it and get rid of it and then start over. And I think it's kind of like that with our people sometimes and our culture sometimes, because you really have to go deep. If you have a culture issue and you're listening to this right now and you're like, man, I'm listening to these 2 and I'm thinking of these people on my team and I'm thinking of our core values and I'm thinking about they just are not in alignment. Whatever you're thinking about right now to that end, it's probably twice as deep as you really realize.
Yes.
And the only thing you can do on Monday next is go back to your business and start hogging out that toxic soil. And what do you do after that? You backfill it with what they call clean fill, which is soil that comes from a spot that's been tested. It's stable, it's pure, and it's the soil that you want to build your building upon. And I think that's the parallel with culture at our work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing to me. I think your point is really well taken about the fact that whatever you think it is, it's probably a lot more than it is. The flip side of that, the good news there is that when you get out the piece or pieces, in our case, it was just one piece that needed to come out. Like I said, the rest of the team has been incredibly effective and really wasn't the problem at all. But one person that is not aligned with your core values is all it takes on a team. And I really learned that lesson in a very painful way. But again, incredibly grateful that we were able to move past it. We also at Here Comes the Guide use EOS, or the traction operating system. And one of the pieces of the puzzle that's been so useful to us in terms of these kinds of issues is the concept of GWC. We say this at Here Comes the Guide all the time. And it's the concept that anyone in any role has to get it. They have to understand what the role is trying to achieve. They have to want it. You can't convince anybody to want, you cannot convince anybody to want success in a role. And then they have to have the capacity to do it. And those three things, I think, are a really, really great lens to look at your employees and to really get a sense of, do they have G, W, and C? And in the case of this top performer that I'm talking about, there was definitely got it, definitely had the capacity to do it, but the want to do it wasn't there. And the reason I bring this up is because of what we at Here Comes the Guide call the niggle. And you've alluded to it a couple times so far. We know so much more than we know, right? Like our gut is telling us things, even when those signs haven't gotten all the way up to our brain in a really front of brain kind of way. We call that the niggle at Here Comes the Guide. One of the best things you can do as a CEO is to hone this piece of things. Hone your ability to identify and pay attention to bring to the forefront that niggle, because I cannot tell you how many times, if I had paid attention when something was over here in the back of my mind, just kind of out of the periphery, how much time and expense I would have saved myself if I had said, you know what, I'm going to pay attention to that. I'm going to bring it to the forefront. This particular issue that I'm talking about, it did come to me on one day, and it was very surprising. And also, I later had many months, because this, honestly, this took me months to get over. I was so upset by everything related to this that I was questioning myself as a leader. I was thinking, how did this happen? How everything that I lead, I hope by example, to my team, how did I let this piece get away from me? How did I not know? I questioned myself. It took me off my game for months. And one of the biggest things I thought about is I had a niggle, but she was so, A, someone I just really liked, honestly, and B, so good at her job. And the numbers were so strong that I just kept pushing it away. And that niggle had been there for probably 6 months. There was something not exactly aligned with the leadership of that particular team. So that's going to be my take home from today, from this conversation, is identify your niggles. This is part of the reason why I think every CEO should be doing morning pages, should be sitting down every morning and clearing the decks of whatever's on your mind, because those niggles, that's how they can begin to come out early. When you create a place for that to go, where you're like, this doesn't have to make sense right now. That's a really great way to begin to hone that voice of your intuition.
I think we need to dive into on a different episode the GWC, because like you, we found it to be perhaps the most powerful filter by which you can analyze your team and yourself, quite frankly. In fact, right now, we were just talking about it at our traction meeting last Thursday and Friday for Kitchen and Bath Crate. We had a 2-day annual traction meeting off-site. And what I was sharing with the team is a conviction that I'm playing a role in our newer business that I absolutely get. I don't really want, and I'm falling short to some extent on having the capacity to do it because it's not aligned with what I'm gifted for. So the GWC applies to our people, but if we're being honest, it also applies to us. And we have to be asking that question too. Am I in the right seat on the bus? Am I aligned with the GWC of my role? And if not, I need to get out of that spot as quick as I can and find someone that's going to really flourish in that role so that I can then go and grow and do my best work in the realms that I'm good at.
Yeah, no question. That issue of GWC is something that we need to do an entire episode on. So, Scott, when you had to deal with this issue, when you had to get rid of this top performer, what was the backlash? What was the big downside? Was it purely revenue? Like, what were the things that happened that were tough? You know, it was the right thing to remove the person from the culture. We know that. But what did you have to deal with in the aftermath?
Well, like I mentioned before, I caught this too late. And so as myself and Jake, who runs Kitchen and Bath Crate, the more we dove into it, once again, the more we saw how deep the toxic chemicals had seeped into the soil. And the repercussions were a couple things. Number one, Jake and I had to step into that person's role, which had an overarching negative effect on the organization because we were no longer in the leadership seats the same number of hours that we were the day before we made this move. So the time between when we let this person go and replaced them, we hampered the organization during that time because we simply had to backfill. This person's toxicity had already seeped into some other team members, and thankfully we were able to save all of them but one. And when I say save, meaning they were influenced by the toxic attitude, but they weren't at their core polluted by it. They were slightly off track, and we were able to kind of get them back into the fold other than one. And this person was so far intertwined with this other individual that they both had to go. In fact, they went within 15 minutes of each other.
Oh, wow.
And so that, once again, created a separate void that others in the organization had to step into. And I think my takeaway was, I hate to go back to all these analogies, but we have some great technology now that helps us catch a lot of things that weren't caught 30 years ago from a cancer perspective. And what happens, you can go in, maybe have a procedure or treatment, and your odds of success are much greater. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to the culture. And what I really regret is not having that screening earlier, not recognizing that cancer earlier. Because what happened is when we had to do the procedure to get rid of the cancer, it put us into a funk for 6 months. And 6 months in the small and mid-sized business world is an eternity, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so, here's the deal. If you're going to let someone go, you're signing up for a couple things no matter what. You're signing up for uncomfortable conversations. You're signing up for potential liability and risk after the departure. You're signing up for all those things anyway, right? What you might as well do is walk through those things early on and avoid the things you can avoid. Avoid the really difficult removal of that cancerous tumor that's going to harm your organization. And I think a lot of business owners, Meredith, I don't know if you've seen this as well, and I've been guilty of this too, sometimes just the reluctance to want to make that move because it's going to lead to some temporary pain causes us to tolerate some things that we shouldn't. When at the end of the day, if we really look back at it, we really think about it, the pain of not solving it earlier was way worse than the pain of solving it in the moment. And I think that's something as leaders we have to constantly be fighting against.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the most effective exercises that I put into place after this happened, because I just was kicking myself for having had this niggle and not acted upon it, is asking myself every single day when I do my morning pages, what is the one thing that I need to do today that I most don't want to do today? Forcing the answer to that question every single day. Sometimes it's something really small, like there's some really small piece of work that just irritates me and I don't feel like doing it. And sometimes it's, I need to have a conversation that's really difficult. I need to really think through a potential, move of a couple of people, something like that, something that relates to my people that I know is going to be difficult, but I know it's best for the business. So forcing the answer to that question is one of the most transformative practices that I've undertaken.
Yeah, I have a kind of a secret business partner. We've been business partners since 2009. I don't talk about the business because I don't have an operational role in it, but he's just phenomenal. I adore this guy. He runs his own business, and he's just one of those people in your life that has wisdom that you love to expose yourself to. And he said years ago, this is probably 15 years ago, he had heard this quote somewhere that the effectiveness of a leader is determined by how many uncomfortable conversations they're willing to have in a day.
Yep.
And man, that really has hit home with me over the years, that if you're going to raise your hand and sign up for the role of leader, whether it be in your business, in your family, in a local organization that you're part of, and you're not willing to have those uncomfortable conversations, you will never, ever achieve your maximum effectiveness in that role. And it's probably going to harm the organization long term.
Absolutely. I mean, the uncomfortable conversations are my absolute least favorite part of the job, and it is the most important part. Along those lines, one of the things that we did after that I felt was so important, and it really happened within, I think, 24 hours of this removal, was it was really important to me for our culture's sake to obviously let everybody in the company know that this removal had taken place, which was going to be really shocking and really difficult for a lot of people, but also to let them know why. Now, I thought a lot about that. And of course, you want to be really responsible in maintaining privacy. What I wasn't going to do is talk about that person, I wasn't going to shit talk that person. Then I just hired them for shit talking other people. So I wasn't going to do that. But what I couldn't do is make a removal like this and not explain it, because to the rest of the team, that would have been so much more damaging for them to be just wondering why something like this would happen. It would make them afraid for their own jobs, afraid that they now didn't really know, like, well, what happened? So I did a Loom, which is software that we use all the time, a video that went out to everybody, and just explained generally, not getting into the weeds of all of the stuff, but explained generally that this particular value, like not shit talking other people, had come into play, and that I had needed to remove the person for that reason, that they'd been removed immediately. And it was really, really hard to do. And it was really hard for our team to hear. But it goes back to that issue of trust. I can't ask my team to trust me if they don't know that I'm going to tell them the good stuff, but also the really crappy stuff.
Can I get morbid here a little bit?
Yes.
So I would be remiss in not mentioning that at times in the history of our organization, we have adopted a very medieval approach to post-termination communication to the team. And what I mean by that is, in the dark ages, if you had someone that tried to invade your city, invade your castle, and you vanquished your foe, right? And you took him out on the battlefield, it wasn't uncommon to take their head and post it on a stake at the entry gates of your city as a message to those that might attempt to infiltrate the castle that this can happen to you too. And I know that's so dark when I say it, right? And people are probably thinking I'm a little bit of a psycho here. And they may not be wrong, right? They may not be wrong to some extent.
You're being honest.
I'm being honest, I will say when you part ways with someone for cause or for something that is an affront to your culture, and you communicate that message to your team, and you're basically saying, you see that head on the stake there? Let that be an example to all of us that if we slip into that mindset, I say we very purposefully, because as leaders, you're not exempt from these cultural conformities. We all need to
Yes.
conform to the culture. If you deviate from our culture, that's the result. And let this be a warning to us all. Was that too much, Meredith?
I don't think it's too much. I think I look at it a little bit differently, kind of in the exact opposite way, but I think we're saying the exact same thing. What I felt when I went to my team and told them about what had happened, it wasn't so much, let this be an example that if you do this, the same thing will happen to you. It was more, I want you to know that protecting the culture and protecting all of you is so important to me that when I found that that was being threatened, I was willing to make a really big move that would hurt us in the short term, but protect all of us in the long term. So that was really the way that I looked at that particular thing. But I think what we're saying is the same thing. When your values are being attacked, you have to take decisive action. That's the job of the CEO. If you are not doing that job, even when it's difficult, you are not doing your job.
Absolutely.
All right. So, Scott, what is the one action that you want our listeners to take from this really difficult conversation?
I really like what you said about providing some consistent time in your schedule where you can listen to that small voice, that niggle that you might hear regarding your team. And so my encouragement to those listening is to take 15 minutes a day in the quiet of your morning or your evening or whatever it might be, and think through your team. Think through them one person at a time. And if you get to one and you feel something, concerning, sit on that for a little bit, marinate on that a little bit, and see if it is something that needs to be addressed with some radical candor, right? You and I have talked about Kim Scott's radical candor quite a bit. Maybe you determine that this is something that's toxic. You need to start the process of removing that toxicity from the soil. And another thing I want to mention is when you listen to those still small voices, and when you're paying attention to your culture and you're making decisions early, it gives you time to make really good moves in a way that not only benefits your company, right, and helps with transitioning, but it's also fair to the person that might be leaving you. It also comes across in a way that it's not reactive. It's more of a process of separating. And sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes you need to cut it off quickly and remove it quickly. I get that. But just listening to those little voices and those niggles along the way, listening to them early allows you to come up with a plan that I think is better for everybody involved instead of being reactionary and, oh my gosh, it got to a boiling point and I had to explode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question. And I would say, just to reiterate what I said earlier, ask yourself each day, what is the thing that I need to do today that I wish I didn't need to do? And that should be the first thing that you do each day. And if anyone ever thought that being a CEO was fun or easy, they probably had never done it before. Because it's often, sometimes it is fun, and sometimes it is easy, and sometimes it's very exciting. But man, sometimes in cases like this, it is really not fun. All right, Scott, let's talk a little bit in Monday Family Business. How does it affect you at home when you have to make a move like this? When you does it leak into your home life? Do you bring this stuff home with you?
That's a great question. I feel like one thing that happens over a long period of time of leading or operating a business is you develop that muscle of creating mental boundaries. And early on in my career, I really struggled with creating proper boundaries between work and family, where I would bring negative experiences home too often and too deeply. And so as we sit here at the end of 2025, I think I've come a long way with that, to where when these difficult things happen at the office, do I mention them? Do I commiserate with my wife about them? Does she provide sound counsel about them? Absolutely. Does it just create a storm cloud in the house the moment I walk in anymore? No, I figured out a way to move past that 99% of the time. There's probably once or twice a year where I slip up, and that still comes home with me. Yeah, you gotta find a spot on your drive home, or a spot in your house. Like I had a spot in our house we used to live in the garage, where I'd pull into the driveway. I'd open the garage door, I'd look at that spot, and any of this trash that didn't need to make its way home, I put on that shelf mentally. I literally envision taking it out of my head, putting it on that shelf, because you know what? It'll be there tomorrow morning, but at least I can go be the father and husband that I need to be here. So that's one tool that I've used as well.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. I would say the same thing. Day to day, it probably doesn't leak into my family life, but when these big things happen, I'm not very good at emotionally flipping a switch. I don't compartmentalize as well as you do. That's actually something that our relationship has been really helpful on, because sometimes I will ask myself, like, what would Scott do in this particular situation? Because you do a better job of marshaling your emotions and kind of compartmentalizing, I think, in a way that's really successful. And so I've gotten better at that. When something, especially something with a staffing issue, has really, really gotten to me, or I'm feeling really sad, or I'm feeling really something negative, oftentimes I will always talk about it with my husband. I also talk a lot about it with our youngest. We have 4 kids. Our youngest still lives with us. He's 14. I've always been one to share a lot about my work with my kids. So especially when I'm hiring or firing or training people, we'll talk about what's happening. And I feel like it's really useful for my kids to understand what goes on in the background of a business, and also what goes into being a really good employee. And luckily at my company, we have, so many examples of really, really, really good employees and people who work really well, that it's easy to find that. And in these more difficult situations, I want Jackson, my 14-year-old, to not only understand the business element of things, but also to understand who I am as an individual. Like, I want him to, if he asks me, like, hey, was today a difficult day? Or I might share with him, today was really, really tough, and we talk about it. I want him to be able to say, okay, right, mom is struggling today. How can I step up for her in this way? Like, I want him to know me as an individual. And so these situations have given me that understanding. So it does, for better or for worse, there are times when work comes into play at home.
I would love to explore that topic in this podcast at some point. How do we talk to our kids about entrepreneurship and the business world? Because that's a deep well right there. And I have some great examples and thoughts on it. Would love to chat about that in the future. I think it's super important.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. All right, next week, we are going to be talking about a topic that I find a lot more fun. And that is the topic of remote forever versus the office is not dead. I have a fully distributed team. We all work from home. Scott, you are a hands-on construction company. You guys work together in person. So we are going to hash that out. There's another example of a place where we each think we are right.
Yes, I can't wait to dive into this. I do have some very strong thoughts, and I'm just trying to figure out, how do I present them to you without offending your entire company?
Well, they will be listening, and they're going to keep calling you the very wrong brother if you disagree with us too much.
I love the Hoppies. Big Hoppy fan right here.
Yes, they love you too. All right, that is a wrap on another episode of Monday Next. I am forever glad, Scott, that we are able to tackle the fun conversations and the ones that are really, really hard.
Yeah, and this one was definitely a difficult one. And I think I'd be remiss in not mentioning that despite the fact we're focusing on the members of our team that needed to move on and were perhaps toxic, you and I are so lucky to have the 99% of people on our team that just kick ass and are amazing people. And so I I didn't want to end this episode without acknowledging that because I know you're right there with me on that. But don't let our talk of toxicity leave the impression that we don't have some amazing people on our team.
Right. I mean, I think part of the reason why these situations were so difficult was because they were such outlier situations, right? Ones we hadn't dealt with before because our teams are so strong. All right. We want to know what you are thinking about this episode. So definitely DM us. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know the situations that you're running up against. We want to hear from you. And you can find me on Instagram at Meredith Monday Schwartz. And if you want to hear me talk about books instead of business, you can join me at Currently Reading Podcast.
And you can connect with me on Instagram and TikTok. Both are at Scott Monday, or even better, I have a Substack that I send out every Saturday, scottmonday.substack.com. And there I write about things like building businesses, changing culture, implementing AI, and applying systems to your family and your personal life. And of course, you can follow this show here at Monday Next Podcast on Instagram.
If you're enjoying these conversations, tell someone about the show. Word of mouth is the best way for this podcast to grow.
You can also help us by rating us and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts and sharing the show on your socials. That's a great way for us to connect with new listeners.
And of course, we would love to hear from you. Hit us up with a DM and let us know what parts of these conversations are really resonating with you.
Next week, like Meredith mentioned, we're tackling remote work versus in office, which should be interesting since Meredith hasn't had an office in years, and I literally can't run my business without one.
Spoiler alert, I am going to win that argument.
We'll see about that.
All right, until Monday next, keep being audacious.